And in this episode of All Things Conflict with me, your host, Maria Arper, we've got a very special guest. This series is called Justice Redesigned, and we often talk about justice as something over there and something that, other people need to take care of, whether we are victims or perpetrators, that there's a system. But in this episode, we're going to talk to a mother. Her name's Joan, and she lost her son very suddenly, unprovoked. And what we're about to talk about is the humility of finding justice from your own self-empowerment. So take a breath, listen carefully, and let's talk about restorative justice. Thank you. Joan, how lovely that you would agree to come on this podcast with me for a conversation. I didn't meet you very long ago, but I knew of you because there is a play, which is a very successful play called Punch. And I don't really want to dredge up your story or have you go over the past because, what you're doing is incredibly brave anyway. But you are a mother that lost a son far too early. And we use in our society, we talk about restorative justice, and then we use words like forgiveness and justice and mercy. And what I found in you is a person who's actually a living example of those words. And so what I wanted to do is just invite you to just talk about that journey of how you ended up being able to be in relationship with the person whose punch led to your son's death.
Okay, so rightly so. I lost my son in 2011 in a one-punch attack in Nottingham. It was very hard. It took about a month for the police to arrest the person who done it. And I was very bitter and very angry about what had happened. It was an unprovoked attack. My son had done nothing wrong. We didn't have a trial. I needed to find out, what if my son had knocked a glass or spoken to somebody or upset this boy in some way. But we couldn't find any information. The boy was given 14 months to serve, and I felt that was another blow to myself because my son's life was worth more than 14 months. Well, that's how I felt at the time. So while he was inside, I tried to find out information about what he was doing now. Was he trying to better himself before he came out, or was he just going to come out and do this again? But with everything we asked, we were put up barriers, data protection. We can't have any information about what he's doing. And again, I felt let down by the systems. So luckily, after he was just due to come out, victim support offered us restorative justice. And they told us, if the boy doesn't engage, because both parties have got to engage, then there'd be no way forward. But I'd got nothing to lose. So I just thought, well, we'll give it a go. And restorative justice was the best thing that we ever done, because we started just with the facilitators coming, finding out what we wanted from it. And then obviously the boy, Jacob, decided that he would engage with us. So we were lucky on that. And it was just them coming. And at the time, it was just these questions asked about the night, why he'd done it. They would come back and they would tell us how he answered the questions, not just what he said, but whether he was upset or, felt remorse or anything like that. They would give you the feelings of the boy. So you started in yourself to build a character of what he was like. So I asked him, what are you going to do with your life now? And I think he was shocked that I cared. But I cared because I just felt I didn't want him to become a revolving door of going in and out of prison. Okay, he'd done the worst crime, but just with other crimes going in and out, what sort of life is that? And so I felt with the questions he'd answered and how he'd answered them that maybe we could, support him into maybe making a better life for himself. With that, he did say he wanted to go into education. That was difficult, getting him into education, but with all of us, probation, restorative justice, and our backing, we got him into education. He'd done his access to university course, and when he'd finished that, so we'd been in contact for about 2.5 years, we decided it was time to actually meet face to face. In my mind, the only picture I had was that mugshot, which was, an evil looking person, which most mugshots are, I guess. But at that meeting, it wasn't an evil person that came through that room. It was a vulnerable young man. And I would never have known that if I hadn't have done the restorative justice, would I? I'd have just been lost in this world of this evil person killing my son.
So I really, if I go back to the beginning, when after this happened, it took a month for the police to arrest him, and then there wasn't a trial, so I'm assuming that that's because he pleaded guilty.
Yes, so he pleaded guilty when he was arrested. So the police had... Jacob didn't know what he'd done. I mean, he knew he'd hit my son, but he didn't know the consequences of his actions. He left the scene and his mates left the scene. And then the police kept it quiet while they looked for, once James died, because it was only GBH when he was hit. But once he died, it turned to murder or manslaughter. And so they then up the, thing and kept it quiet and started looking for him. And it took roughly about a month to find him. But then when he came into the police, he then pleaded guilty and said that he had done it.
So he took responsibility and didn't put you through a trial. But the downside of that was that you were completely starved of information because you weren't there on the night it happened. And as a mother or any sort of close family member or even friends are going to want to understand, like, how did it come about? As you said, was there some interaction? What actually went on? Because we need truth, don't we? It's a really big human need.
Yeah, so that was the main thing I wanted at the time of the restorative justice, was to get information about what happened and why he done it, really. But there was no real message. James was talking to a group of his friends. James was with a group or gang, however you want to say it, and this young boy, Jacob, got a message to say it looks like something's kicking off. He went down to where they'd said they were, and the only face he didn't know was my son's. So he hit my son in the face for no reason, just one punch. And that's a big message as well. Get that one punch out there because it's so dangerous.
Yes, and that ultimately, so that ultimately then led to your son's death, but not in the moment. So there's a really big message there, isn't there? That you've got no idea, the consequences of when we react or act or we take instructions from other people and we're reckless. Then we've got no idea where that's going to take us.
No.
So then I heard that, he pleaded guilty, and one way or another he ended up with a sentence of 14 months, which I guess at the time you were probably in some state of outrage because that wouldn't have felt like justice.
My son worked. He was a paramedic. He was a good boy or good man. And I felt, what justice had he had or we had, because 14 months was, nothing. People were getting longer for stealing tellies in the London riots, which were the same summer. And it was just heartbreaking. And you start to appeal to them, but there is no appeal because they said that, he didn't do it with intent and it had been down to manslaughter, which, that is fair enough. But to just get the 14 months at that time, I was really, really beside myself.
I can imagine. And so victim support offered you restorative justice, which is a way to be in contact with the perpetrator or the person who is, created the problems. But it sounds to me like it was quite a long road of you didn't just make an appointment and sit down with somebody. It sounds like there was a lot of preparation and a lot of go-between work.
Yeah, so restorative justice, they came to find out what we wanted out of it and make sure that, we wanted things that weren't a threat to him or anybody else. It was just what information we needed, and they're like assessing you all the time. So they were assessing Jacob when they saw him, but we're so pleased he agreed to do it. Obviously, not everybody's going to, and I agree it won't work for everybody. But if everybody could just be offered it, we've got a way forward.
Yeah, so everyone offered it, and of course, the way the system works now is that a person doesn't have to accept it. They can actually say, "I don't want to," and I see the I see the reasons for that, because we don't want to put someone in a room who has no remorse, or someone in a room who's still angry or whatever, because that could actually just re-traumatise everybody. And yet at the same time, we could create a society in which this was the norm, and that we grow up knowing that that's part of answering for the consequences of what we've done, is to speak to the people that we've impacted.
Yes, and if you speak to Jacob, he will say it was very hard coming to see me. I mean, I think myself, it must have been like coming into the lion's den, because it's hard when you have to apologise for somebody. Myself, if you've broken somebody's mug or something at work and you've got to go and apologise, you don't know what that feelings they're going to have for things, And for him to come into that room, I owe him, everything, because I think that was just amazing for him to do it.
Yeah, so you understand that he didn't have to, and he chose to. And so it sounds to me like all along that journey, from pleading guilty and not, putting everyone through a trial, to considering this idea of meeting you face to face, it does sound like maybe something authentic was going on in him. And then I heard you say that, you saw the mugshot, and that's, and the mugshots always look dreadful, but when you actually finally got to meet him, you just saw a vulnerable young man.
Yes, we saw a vulnerable young man. But I mean, also he says that if we hadn't have done restorative justice from his side, he would have come out of prison and he had been back on that gang doing the same as he was doing when he went in. So it has helped both of us tremendously. It's not one-sided at all.
It's not, sorry?
It's not one-sided at all. It's definitely both sides it works.
Well, what you're, when you're talking about this, it sits in very much what happens to people is when bad things happen in our lives, there are several questions, why me, why has this happened now, what is this about, there's a kind of needing to clarify and unpack the story. And then the next thing that happens is for victims is, how do we stop this happening to other people? And we have no chance if we can't talk to them.
No, that's the main thing. Open up and talking to people and finding out why, or another way forward, or how we can work together maybe, or even just have contact with each other. I mean, to begin with, it was just the facilitators, and then after a while we changed to email. So he would email us how he was getting on in education, and what our support, I suppose, in a way, that are our backing, that he was doing the right thing. And as I said to him, getting an education will help you get a future in work, but it doesn't change the person. You still need to look at the people you're hanging about with and, pull that away, which is another big ask, isn't it? Somebody to change their whole life, everything they've known.
It's a very big ask, but in fact, the care you were offering was in support of him changing his life to make sure that he didn't just go through a revolving door and harm more people. I think that's, so while it's a very big ask, I think what you were putting on the table was an attractive offer. Somebody who actually will care about what I do with my life.
Yeah.
So So I heard you also say, everybody should be offered this. And I guess that one of the things you're doing is working in support of that in some way. And the play is one way to get this message out to people. But how do you take this message out?
So the message goes out in the play. We go to schools if when we're invited. We go to prisons, anywhere we're invited to talk about it. We're working with the Common Ground Justice Project to try and get a right to be heard. Everybody offered the restorative justice. Yes, people will tell you restorative justice is available for everybody. But when you've lost your son or been in a traumatic experience, you're not going to be Googling, what could help me? What is there about? And I'd never heard of it. I didn't know anything about it until we were offered it. So this is why I think it should be offered.
Yes, so the first thing is it's not actually well known or common out there. And interestingly enough, I don't know if you know, but in the 1990s and the early 2000s, the Met Police actually did have a restorative justice department, and schools had restorative justice facilitators and officers in schools, and that all got disbanded. It all got disbanded, and so it's now something that's not really out in the mainstream. And so firstly, the thing is, people need to actually know this exists. And for me, the best way is to introduce it in schools. If we can introduce, and I've done a lot of restorative work in schools, when kids are having small squabbles, when kids are doing things that don't create the kind of harm that you've experienced, and we show them this way of doing things, then it can become embedded and people will know to call on it later on. But so firstly, people need to actually know what it is and know that it's available. And then we need to offer it. It needs to be something that can happen swiftly.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, one of the things, in the case of your son, it was very random. It was wrong place, wrong time. But actually, when you look at often, and this case was manslaughter, but often when you look at murder, I think the statistic is that 75% of people who are murdered knew the person who did it. So there must have been some ongoing relationship, no matter how toxic. It's a really interesting way of looking at things. That, as humans, we need to be in relationship with each other, because the second part, for me, of bringing people into a restorative conference or a restorative circle is that the person who perpetrates the harm has to face themselves. They have to actually have to come, because you can sleepwalk your way through a prison sentence. Just never really taking on board the depth of what you've done. But to actually talk to and meet the harm in person and meet the impact of what you've done is, for me, it's incredibly transformative to watch people actually then have to take responsibility at a deep emotional level.
I think it's been, just an amazing, incredible story for us to live in the way to see him transform from this boy that was, he came out of prison. He had no job, nowhere to live, no education, no address. So what hope has he got? And what hope do criminals have if that's the way forward? Yes, if they've been in and out of prison several times, maybe, don't help them. But if it's their first offence, if we could start looking at what are they going back to, how can we address this problem, then maybe we could make a different way forward in that way as well.
Yeah, I think that's really true. The justice system is broken. It is broken in this country. And I'm not laying blame anywhere in particular. I think it's the complexity of the lives we lead. I don't think any government can put this right, especially when they only have 4 or 5 year terms. It's a long road to correcting what's gradually eroded. But we've all got a part to play, haven't we, one way or another. And it's just a remarkable thing to meet you. I mean, it's such a privilege to meet you, and the bravery and the courage that you've shown in demonstrating what forgiveness, justice and mercy actually looks like. Because what I'm telling myself, and maybe you'll either validate it or correct it, is that what you've done has been more in service of your son's memory than anything else I could imagine.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We've done more for the boy that done it than prison ever done. And together we've built something, okay, the play, we don't do it, but it's getting the word across. We go out in schools. We work for the Forgiveness Project in London. And that's how I learned to forgive Jacob, because I just felt that he's turned his life around. He didn't mean to do it. He didn't mean to kill him. Yes, he meant to punch him. You can't take that away, but he didn't mean to kill him. And I just think working together, we are just making a difference. And that's, my way forward.
It's really very moving. And so, there are other people out there. I mean, I used to work a lot with families who'd lost sons and daughters to knife crime or gun crime, so, unfortunately we live in a society where this is a very big reality. What message do you have for other mothers?
I think, my son, he did everything right. He went out with a group of people. He, you say stay together, and, he was well behaved and all this. So it's just so frightening that would have happened to him. He wasn't gone, he hadn't gone somewhere that was terribly rough, or, and he was well brought up. It's just, it's so hard, to believe that it did happen where it happened when he, said all they were doing was going to the cricket. You just can't believe that night, turned that way. But I think you've just got to know what your children are doing, from the other side. You've got to know what your children are doing and what they're up to and what they're getting into, because a lot of it is peer pressure. Some of them, you bring them up properly, but the peer pressure out there, it's just, it's so easy to get into that path. And I think
Really,
Jacob was one of those ones. Jacob was one of those ones. His mother tried really hard to bring him up properly, and then he got into the wrong fairly young age, unfortunately, which you don't think at 12, 13 they're going to get into that sort of gang, but unfortunately he did. And you wouldn't think it at that age.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because you're saying that even Jacob's mum, brought him up as well as she could, or he didn't have a really bad upbringing. And so there's a message, a really deep message here, actually, about as parents and as adults in society, that actually we need to know what our kids are up to, who they're associating with. And I know that, teenagers get all belligerent and they want us out of their business, and they want to be, they want to, find their own independence. And yet actually, I agree with you. We need to know what is happening. And especially because, they've all got phones in their hands now, and we have no idea how far the reach is and what is going on.
Yeah.
So I noticed I had another question for you about the play, actually. So two things. One was about the play. Is it showing again? Where is it on? Is it touring?
So the play starts again in Nottingham, back in Nottingham. I think it's about the 11th of March it starts, and it's going to be there for 3 weeks. Then it will be moving on to Leeds for a week, and then down to Plymouth for a week. So, and that's, all out in the open, and that's all happening. And then hopefully we'll see what it does next after that.
Yeah, so it's got a nice tour that should bring more audiences, because it's got the most phenomenal reviews. I mean, and, I know it's a very moving and deeply thought-provoking piece of work, because it's based on a true story. And then if people are listening to this and they want to know more, or they think, well, actually, I'd love to bring this kind of a talk into my school or into my community, how would people find that, or how would they find you or the group?
We're with the Common Ground Justice group, which you can Google and contact them, and they'll pass on to me through the Forgiveness Project. Again, they send on any inquiries to myself. And then the play, obviously the play. I'm there quite a lot of nights. If I'm asked, I go on stage and do talk back or rap round. It's been to New York, which I also went to, so it's become quite a journey, the play, which I didn't even think they'd sell tickets for to begin with. And yet 94,000 people have seen the play. So
Wow.
yeah, it's
That's quite something. I think I'm sitting in awe of your humility and your hope and the love. You know, you're just generating love, really, in action. You know, what you're doing is love in action. And I thank you for that, because, you know, we hear so many terrible things in the world, and you're just a really good example of how we can turn things around.
let's hope so.
Yeah. Well, this has been a particularly moving and sensitive conversation. And I really thank you for, you know, coming on the podcast and speaking so openly. I do have a sort of surprise question at the end. I think I know what your answer will be. It will be very obvious. But I mean, if I gave you the keys to the justice system and said you could change one thing immediately, what would you change tomorrow?
Well, bring back restorative justice for everybody. And, we've got to look at these prisons, we really have, and how we're letting people out with no hope. If they're let out with no hope, what are they going to do? They're just going to be back in your door. So that's going to cost more than sorting out the problem in the first place. I mean, there must be hundreds that are let out. They've got nowhere to go, no money, and they're just going to go back to crime because that's the life they knew and that's all they can do.
Yes, I know someone who actually, you know, was working on our project and said, and, you know, came to the end of his sentence, and there was nothing else to do but let him out. And he said, "Oh, I'll be straight back." And he was asked, you know, why? He said, I have nowhere to go. I've got nobody. I've got no family. I've got nobody that cares about me. And I just couldn't imagine the responsibility of having a home and paying bills. I wouldn't know how to do it. And then I was talking to someone the other day who knew this person, and he helped him to find Buddhism and suggested that he might join a monastery. And we think he might have done that, which is, you know, amazing. Better type of community to join. But yeah, so it's about, we've got to make sure what's happening to people when they're leaving prison. And we've got to offer restorative justice to everyone.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. It's been a joy. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye-bye.